Clara's resolve wavered. There was no point in lying. He had seen the truth with his own eyes. The mask she had worn for years was shattered. "Please, Mr. Sterling," she said, the plea in her voice a raw, honest thing. Just forget you saw this. It's nothing. I was just lucky." The city was a relentless beast of steel and glass, and at its heart stood Sterling Innovations, a gleaming spire of corporate ambition. Inside, amidst the sterile whir of computers and the hushed rhythm of 1,000 keyboards, Clara felt like a ghost. Her life was a constant, exhausting tightrope walk between two worlds, the brutal, unforgiving reality of her corporate job and the fragile, all-consuming love for her 5-year-old son, Leo. He scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "Lucky you broke a man's wrist and knocked out 2 others with a single blow. That's not luck. That's training. And that's not something you get from sitting behind a desk." He took a step closer, his eyes a focused, intense gray. "Tell me the truth, Clara, or I will find it out for myself." Leo was her universe. He was a small, brilliant boy with a mischievous glint in his big, brown eyes, and a rare, complex medical condition that kept him in and out of hospitals. His world was one of specialist appointments, expensive medications, and sudden emergencies that could strike at any moment. Clara, a single mother with no family to lean on, was his sole protector, provider, and port in the storm. This fierce, unwavering devotion to her son was the only thing that kept her going. But it also made her a liability in the eyes of Sterling Innovations. His words held a weight of authority that she knew she couldn't fight. The man who had once been an enemy was now a witness, and she had no choice but to trust him. She took a deep, shuddering breath and began to speak, the words tumbling out in a rush. Clara had started as a data analyst, her intelligence and attention to detail quickly earning her respect. But as Leo's condition worsened, her work life began to fray. The missed deadlines, the urgent phone calls, the panicked departures. Each was a tiny, jagged tear in the fabric of her professional reputation. Her colleagues whispered. Her manager sighed with a weary, practiced frustration. And at the very top, in the pristine, soundproofed office that overlooked the entire city, a man named Alexander Sterling was watching. "I wasn't always a data analyst," she began, her voice now a low, husky confession. "Before Leo, I was an elite bodyguard. I worked in the shadows, protecting people who were in real danger. I was good at it. I was one of the best." Alexander Sterling was a titan, a man forged in the fires of ruthless efficiency. He had built Sterling Innovations from a small startup into a global powerhouse by cutting waste, maximizing profit, and running his company like a perfectly calibrated machine. He had no time for emotions, no tolerance for inefficiency, and no patience for personal problems. His world was one of numbers, projections, and cold, hard data. And the data point named Clara was becoming a serious problem. Alexander's eyes widened with genuine surprise. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. The woman he saw in his office, the woman he had dismissed as a liability, was a cover, a carefully constructed facade to hide a dangerous past. He had never spoken to her, not directly. He had no need to. He saw her in quarterly performance reports, a name attached to a series of red flags, unexcused absences, underperformance on key projects, a downward spiral of productivity that was, in his professional opinion, unacceptable. To him, Clara was not a woman struggling to save her child. She was a variable, a weak link in his flawless chain of command, a cog that was no longer turning as it should. He saw her story not as a human drama, but as a business case study in poor resource management. He had made his decision. She had to go. "My husband, Leo's father," she continued, her voice filled with a profound sadness. "He was also a part of that world, a rival agent. He was killed in a mission gone wrong. They came after me, and they made it clear that if I didn't disappear, they would come after Leo too." The final straw came on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara was in the middle of a crucial quarterly report, her fingers flying across the keyboard, a desperate attempt to catch up on weeks of lost time. The phone on her desk rang, a private number she had memorized. It was Leo's school. His fever, which had been a low simmer all morning, had spiked. He was disoriented, scared, and asking for his mommy. Clara's heart plummeted. The report could wait, her son could not. The air grew heavy with the weight of her confession. I quit. I left everything behind. I changed my name. I moved to the city, and I tried to become someone else. I tried to become invisible. I learned how to be a normal person, a data analyst. I did it for Leo. I did it to keep him safe. She bolted from her desk, leaving the half-finished report blinking accusingly on her screen. She didn't bother to inform her manager. There was no time for explanations, no energy for apologies. She simply ran, her mind a frantic blur of hospital names, phone numbers, and the tiny, terrified voice of her son. She would get there, she told herself. She would be there for him. She always was. He was silent for a long moment, absorbing her story. The meek, timid employee was a ghost. The woman in front of him, the woman who had fought so fiercely to protect herself, was a warrior. And the thugs? He asked, his voice low. Why were they after you? And how did they know about me, about my job? But her absence did not go unnoticed. The project manager, a nervous man named Mr. Davies, saw her empty desk and the half-finished report. He knew the report was due to Alexander Sterling himself. The fear in his gut was a cold, bitter thing. He knew this was the end for Clara. He printed the report, a grim, incomplete testament to her failure, and attached a note explaining her absence. He placed it on a silver tray and sent it up to the 50th floor. Clara's face hardened. They said their boss wanted them to deliver a message. They knew about my conversation with you, about you getting tired of me. It's a message from someone in my past, someone who knew I was vulnerable and knew the fastest way to get to me was through you, through my job. They thought I was a threat, a loose end. They thought I was a pawn they could use against you. Alexander was in his office, reviewing the day's profits, a satisfied smirk on his face. The tray arrived, a small blemish on the otherwise perfect afternoon. He picked up the report, his eyes scanning the numbers, his brow furrowing with a rising tide of impatience. The numbers were sloppy, the analysis was incomplete, and then he saw the note. Alexander's mind, so used to corporate strategy and financial maneuvering, began to race. This wasn't just a street crime. This was a direct, targeted attack on his company. A rival, an enemy he didn't even know he had, was using Clara to get to him. The woman he had seen as a liability was, in fact, a crucial piece of a far bigger, more dangerous game. Ms. Clara Reyes had to leave unexpectedly. Her son had an emergency. I need your help, Clara, he said. The words a direct, honest plea. Your life, and now mine, is in danger. I need to know who is behind this. And I need to know how to protect both of us. Will you help me? Alexander crumpled the note in his hand, a sharp, dismissive gesture. This was it. This was the final proof he needed. He didn't care about a son or an emergency. He cared about the bottom line, about efficiency, about the fact that a 5-year-old child's health was once again interfering with his company's productivity. He was a CEO, not a charity. He pressed the intercom on his desk. Clara looked at him, at the cold, hard CEO who had just a day ago told her that her life was not his concern. And in his eyes, for the first time, she saw something else entirely. She saw respect. She saw a flicker of genuine fear. And she saw, in the depths of his stormy gray eyes, a hint of something she never thought she would see again, an ally. A new, terrifying chapter in her life had just begun. The cool night air of the alley was now filled with the palpable tension of a new, unspoken pact. Clara, her body still humming with the aftershocks of adrenaline, looked at Alexander, the man who, just hours ago, had represented everything cold and unfeeling in her world, now stood before her as a potential ally, a lifeline in a storm she had been fighting alone for years. His plea, "Will you help me?" had been a genuine admission of his own vulnerability, a rare glimpse behind the steel facade of the CEO. Samantha, he said, his voice as smooth and cold as polished marble, send an email to Clara Reyes. Tell her to come see me first thing tomorrow morning, and tell her to clear her desk. She hesitated, her mind racing. The last time she had trusted someone, it had led to the death of her husband and a life of constant fear for her son. But there was something in Alexander's eyes, not just fear, but a flicker of respect, a recognition of her strength that she hadn't seen since her days in the shadows. She knew, instinctively, that he wasn't lying. His corporate empire was under attack, and she was the key to understanding who the enemy was. The message was clear, a death sentence delivered with the same cold, detached precision with which he ran his empire. When Clara finally returned to her tiny, cluttered apartment late that night, exhausted from a long, tearful hospital visit, she saw the email. The subject line, "Meeting with Mr. Sterling," was a dagger to her heart. She knew what it meant. There was no hope, no second chance. She was going to be fired. And as she watched her son sleep, his small body hooked up to a tangle of tubes and wires, a profound soul-crushing fear settled over her. The monster of corporate indifference was about to win. She was about to lose everything. The next morning, Clara walked through the gleaming, impersonal lobby of Sterling Innovations, feeling as though she were marching to her own execution. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread. She had barely slept, spending the night staring at her sleeping son, his small hand wrapped around her finger, the fear of what would become of them a heavy weight on her chest. "I will," she said, her voice firm. "But on my terms. This is not about your company. This is about protecting my son. I will not put him in danger. We operate in the shadows. Nobody, and I mean nobody, can know about this. Not your assistants, not your board, no one." She took the elevator up to the 50th floor. The doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a world of hushed professionalism and an almost surgical cleanliness. Samantha, Alexander's unflappable assistant, greeted her with a polite but distant nod. "Mr. Sterling will see you now," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Alexander nodded immediately, his mind already shifting into a new mode of operation. "Agreed. I will provide you with whatever you need, resources, information, whatever it takes. But you have to be my eyes and ears. I need to know everything." The office was a monument to Alexander's detached efficiency. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering a panoramic view of the city, a cold, majestic painting of the world he dominated. The desk was a slab of polished mahogany, completely bare, save for a single report, her report, and a tablet. Alexander sat behind it, a silhouette against the blinding light of the morning sun. He was a man of sharp angles and clean lines, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his face a chiseled mask of authority. He did not look up as she entered. He had a private driver take her home, a quiet, tense ride where they spoke in hushed tones about the logistics of their unlikely alliance. She gave him her burner phone number, a lifeline she had kept hidden for years. He gave her a secure, encrypted company phone, a device that could bypass normal corporate security protocols. The deal was set. The timid data analyst was now the CEO's secret weapon. "Ms. Reyes," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble. He gestured to a leather chair opposite his desk without looking at her. "Have a seat." Over the next few weeks, their world was a whirlwind of secret meetings and hushed phone calls. Alexander, a man who had once seen her as an interchangeable asset, now saw her as a partner. He was a quick study, and with Clara's guidance, he began to see his corporate world not just as a battlefield of numbers, but as a dangerous game of deception and power plays. He gave her unfettered access to his company's private server, and with her honed skills, she began to unravel the web of lies. Clara sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. She tried to appear calm, professional, but her entire body was screaming with panic. She waited, the silence in the room stretching and tightening until it was unbearable. She found the first clue in the company's financial records, a series of small, seemingly insignificant payments to a shell company in a remote location. She traced the money, and with Alexander's help, they uncovered the truth. A ruthless corporate rival, a man named Victor Thorne, was systematically draining Sterling Innovations from the inside. He had used a series of anonymous proxies to funnel money out of the company, and he had used the same proxies to hire the thugs who had ambushed her. He had been behind the attack, not to hurt her, but to send a message to Alexander, a message that his company was vulnerable and his personal life was not safe. Finally, he looked up. His eyes, the color of a stormy gray sky, were cold and penetrating, like a laser beam cutting through her carefully constructed facade. "I'm looking at your performance report, Ms. Reyes," he began, his voice flat. "Your numbers have been in a consistent decline for the past 6 months. Your project completion rate is down 30%. Your team has been left to pick up your slack on multiple occasions. Yesterday, you left in the middle of a crucial report. The more they uncovered, the more Clara and Alexander's professional relationship began to change. He was captivated by her. The woman who had once seemed so timid and fragile was a force of nature. He saw the way her mind worked, the meticulous precision with which she pieced together the clues, the quiet confidence in her voice as she explained her findings. He saw her love for her son, the fierce, protective instinct that was the engine of her strength. He saw her not as a liability, but as a warrior, a woman who had fought to build a life for her child, a woman who deserved his respect, his trust, and his admiration. Clara's voice, when she finally found it, was a fragile whisper. My son, he had a fever. He's very sick. Mr. Sterling. It's a rare condition, and it flares up without warning. I had to go to him. There was nobody else. Clara, too, began to see a different side of him. The cold, unfeeling CEO was not who she thought he was. He was a man of immense intelligence and a surprisingly deep sense of loyalty. He was a man who had been so focused on his own world, his own battles, that he had become blind to the human element. But now, with her help, he was beginning to see. He was beginning to understand that there was more to life than quarterly reports and profit margins. Alexander's expression did not change. Your son, Ms. Reyes, is not a part of this company. His health is not a factor in our quarterly projections. I run a business, not a charity. I hired you to do a job, and you are not doing it. Your personal problems have become a liability to Sterling Innovations. One evening, as they sat in a quiet, secluded cafe, reviewing a stack of documents, he looked at her, his stormy gray eyes soft with a new, hesitant warmth. I was wrong about you, Clara, he said, his voice low and sincere. I am sorry. I had no right to judge you. You are the strongest person I have ever met. The words hit her like a physical blow, each one a cold, hard stone. Tears welled in her eyes, but she fought them back fiercely. She was not going to break down in front of this man. Please, Mr. Sterling, she pleaded, her voice trembling with the effort to stay calm. I'm trying. I work late. I take work home. I'm a good employee. I need this job. It's the only way I can afford his medical care. Clara's heart, which had been so guarded for so long, fluttered with a strange, unfamiliar warmth. She had a new purpose, a new mission, and a new ally. She had a chance to not only protect her son, but to finally face the ghost of her past. She had found a new life, a new hope, in the most unexpected of places. The cold-hearted CEO and the fading single mom had become an unlikely, unbreakable team, ready to face the storm together. The grand ballroom was a glittering tableau of wealth and power, a sea of polished marble and sparkling chandeliers. It was the night of Sterling Innovations' 20th anniversary gala, an event that had been meticulously planned to showcase the company's success and, more importantly, to announce the finalization of a crucial merger. For Alexander, it was the culmination of 2 decades of relentless work. For Clara, it was the final stage of her meticulously planned counterattack. The woman who had once been a timid office worker was now Alexander's head of security, a silent, powerful guardian moving through the crowd with a watchful, practiced eye. She was dressed in a simple, elegant gown that belied the coiled strength beneath, a ghost in plain sight. She pulled out a crumpled photo from her purse, a picture of Leo smiling brightly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. This is Leo. He's a wonderful boy. He just needs me, and I need to be here for him. The target was Victor Thorne, the corporate rival who had tried to sabotage Sterling Innovations from the shadows. Clara and Alexander had spent weeks building their case, a digital fortress of evidence against him. They had a mountain of documents, encrypted emails, and wiretapped conversations that proved his guilt, the shell companies, the money laundering, and the calculated plan to bring Alexander's company to its knees. But they needed to catch him in the act, to expose his treachery in a way that was public and undeniable. The gala was the perfect stage. Alexander took the photo, his fingers brushing hers. He held it for a moment that felt like an eternity, and then placed it back on the desk with a quiet, dismissive thud. As Alexander began his speech, Clara stood in the shadows, her eyes scanning the room for Victor. He was there, a man with a wolfish grin and a predatory gleam in his eyes. a snake in a designer suit. He was surrounded by a small group of investors, men who had been secretly in his pocket, believing they would be on the winning side of a hostile takeover. "Ms. Reyes," he said, his voice softer, but no less chilling. "I have to consider what is best for the company. Your life, as you say, is not my concern. I am a CEO. My job is to protect this company, not to solve your problems. I'm not firing you today. I am giving you one final warning. One more unexcused absence, one more missed deadline, one more drop in productivity, and you are gone. Do you understand?" Alexander's speech was a masterpiece of misdirection. He spoke of the merger, the future, and the new opportunities for Sterling Innovations. He made it all sound so promising, so real, that Victor, in his hubris, began to relax. He was confident. He had his proxies in place. He was certain that he was about to win. The words were a reprieve, but a temporary one. He wasn't firing her, but he was telling her she was on borrowed time. She left his office, the taste of defeat bitter in her mouth. As she walked down the long, empty hallway, she felt the tears she had fought so hard to hold back finally fall. She had just been given an impossible choice: choose her son or choose her job. And she knew, with a certainty that was both heartbreaking and absolute, that no matter what, she would always choose her son. She had lost. The monster of corporate indifference had won. She just didn't know it was about to lose. Clara walked out of Sterling Innovations, the gleaming doors closing behind her like the final, echoing sound of a tomb sealing shut. The world outside, once a vibrant panorama of opportunity, now felt like a gray, unforgiving concrete jungle. The sun was a pale, indifferent orb in the sky, and the relentless hum of the city was a chorus of 1,000 voices that had nothing to do with her. The words of Alexander Sterling, "Your life is not my concern," replayed in her mind. A cold, brutal mantra. He hadn't fired her, but the reprieve felt more like a sentence. She was a woman living on the edge, one wrong move away from losing everything. But just as Alexander was about to make the final, crucial announcement, a new voice echoed through the sound system, a voice that was not his own. It was a pre-recorded message from one of Victor's corporate spies, a man named Henderson, who had been secretly funneling him information about Sterling Innovations. Fear, cold and sharp, was a constant companion now. It was a tangible weight in her purse, where a handful of crumpled bills lay next to the photo of Leo. This was all the money they had. How would she afford his medication? The next hospital visit. The small, terrifying questions multiplied in her mind, each one a phantom hand tightening around her throat. She needed to get home, to the only place she felt safe, to the only person who mattered. She needed to see her son. "The server is a gold mine." "Victor," the voice said, his words a chillingly clear betrayal. "I've sent you everything. The files, the passwords, all of it. Sterling has no idea." She decided to take a shortcut, a narrow alleyway she'd used 100 times before. It was a grimy, forgotten space between two soaring corporate buildings, a shortcut that smelled of stale rain and exhaust fumes. As she turned the corner, the world abruptly changed. The hum of the city faded, replaced by the shuffling sound of heavy boots on concrete. A knot of 3 men, their faces a collage of sneers and malice, blocked her path. The room fell silent, the collective shock a palpable force. Alexander, his face a mask of feigned surprise, looked at Victor, who had gone pale, his eyes wide with a sudden, terrible realization. His phone, which had been in his hand, buzzed with an urgent message. "Henderson just bailed. He's at the police station." He confessed everything. They were hulking figures, all muscle and tattoos, with the feral glint of street predators in their eyes. The leader, a man with a scarred eyebrow and a chilling smile, stepped forward. Well, what do we have here?" he growled, his voice a gravelly sneer. A little corporate mouse taking a trip down the wrong hole. The trap had been sprung. While Victor was distracted, Clara, with a team of hired specialists, had been working in the company's server room. She had hacked into his private server, a digital fortress he thought was impenetrable. She had planted a Trojan horse in his system, a sophisticated virus that would send a live, encrypted feed of his private emails and messages to a public server. She had then used the audio recording of Henderson to trigger the hack. ensuring that the evidence was not just exposed, but broadcast live for the world to see. Clara's blood ran cold. This wasn't a random mugging. This felt different, more deliberate. Her heart pounded, a panicked drum in her ears, but a deeper, more primal instinct, long dormant, began to stir. She took a small step back, her eyes scanning the alley for an escape route. There was none. The two other men fanned out, cutting off her retreat, their movements practiced and menacing. A massive screen behind Alexander, which was supposed to display the details of the merger, now showed a live feed of Victor's private server. The emails, the messages, the financial transactions, all of it was being broadcast for the entire room to see. The plot, the bribes, the illegal transactions, it was all laid bare. The wolfish grin on Victor's face had been replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated horror. "Leave me alone," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "I don't have anything valuable." He lunged for Alexander, his face twisted in a final, impotent rage. But before he could reach him, Clara, moving with the speed of a striking viper, was in front of him. Her hand shot out, not in a fist, but in a precise, swift strike to his neck, the same move she had used in the alley. Victor's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed, a limp heap on the floor. The head of security had just saved her CEO, and in the process, she had won the war. The grand ballroom, once a stage for ambition and deceit, was now a scene of utter pandemonium. The police moved swiftly, taking Victor away in handcuffs as the assembled guests, a mix of shocked investors and disbelieving rivals, buzzed with 1,000 whispers. The corporate world, which thrived on secrets and subtle power plays, had just witnessed a public, brutal, and very personal downfall. The man with the scar laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "We know what you have, sweetheart. A pretty little life, a soft little boy. Our boss just wants us to deliver a message. A strong one." He took another step forward, his hand reaching for her arm. "Say, maybe you should think about quitting that job of yours. A little birdie told us your boss is getting tired of you anyway." Clara stood beside Alexander, her gaze steady, her composure a silent testament to her strength. The adrenaline from the confrontation with Victor had subsided, leaving behind a profound sense of peace. The ghost of her past, the threat that had haunted her for years, was finally gone. Her son, Leo, was safe. And for the first time since her husband's death, she felt a glimmer of hope for a future free from fear. The words hit her with the force of a blow. A little birdie. Who would know about her conversation with Alexander? Who would go to such lengths to intimidate her? A cold, horrible realization began to dawn. This wasn't a street crime. It was a calculated, targeted attack. This was the work of someone powerful, someone who knew about her job, about her son. This was a message from a rival, a man who saw her as a pawn in a game far bigger and more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. Alexander, a man who had always been so meticulously in control, was a study in raw emotion. He looked at Clara not as his head of security, but as his savior. His eyes, once so cold and detached, were now filled with a mixture of profound gratitude and a deep, hesitant affection. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, and he had seen her at her most powerful. He had seen a woman who would risk everything for her child, and in doing so, had saved him. The first thug lunged for her, his large hand aimed at her face. But in that moment, the meek, timid office worker vanished. The woman who had fought to survive a world far more dangerous than this alley, the woman who had walked away from a life of violence for the sake of her son, resurfaced. Her eyes, once filled with terror, hardened into a fierce, focused glare. Her body, once tense with fear, became a coiled spring of controlled energy. She moved with a speed that was almost supernatural, a blur of motion that left the men stunned. Later that night, after the chaos had subsided and the police had left with Victor in tow, they were alone in Alexander's office. The city lights twinkled outside the glass wall, a serene contrast to the storm they had just weathered. He poured her a glass of water, his hand still trembling slightly. She didn't dodge the attack. She met it. Her hand shot out, not in a desperate flail, but in a precise, swift strike to the thug's wrist. A sharp, sickening crack echoed in the alley as she broke his grip. With the same fluid motion, she twisted his arm. using his momentum to flip him over her shoulder. He landed with a bone-jarring thud, his large body crumpling against a row of rusted trash cans. "Clara," he began, his voice low and sincere, "I owe you everything. You saved my company, you saved my life, and you changed me. The man I was a few months ago, the man who was so cold and so blind, that man would have fired you. He would have missed all of this." He gestured to the city below, to the empire he had nearly lost. "He would have missed you." The other two men, their confidence shattered, stared at her in a mix of shock and disbelief. She didn't wait for them. She moved again, her movements a blur of controlled, elegant violence. She ducked a clumsy punch, her elbow connecting with the second man's solar plexus, the air rushing from his lungs in a sharp wheeze. As he doubled over, she delivered a swift, precise kick to his knee. Another sickening crack, and he fell, howling in pain. Clara said nothing, her eyes fixed on his. She saw the truth in his gaze, a vulnerability she never thought she would see in him. The leader, the man with the scar, stood alone. His sneer was gone, replaced by a wide-eyed, terrified confusion. He reached for a switchblade from his pocket. But before he could even open it, Clara was in front of him. Her hand, not a fist, but a palm, shot out and struck him precisely on the side of his neck, a point just below his ear. The blow was not meant to kill, but to incapacitate. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed, a limp heap on the ground. "I was wrong about you," he confessed, taking a step closer. "I was wrong about everything. I thought that a person's life was a collection of data points, a series of numbers on a spreadsheet. I was so arrogant. I didn't see you. I didn't see your strength, your courage, your love for your son. I was a fool." The alley was silent again, save for the groans of the defeated men. Clara stood panting, her hands trembling, the adrenaline crashing through her veins like a tidal wave. The office worker was gone. The protector had returned, and just as she turned to leave, her heart a wild, frantic drum, she heard a new voice. He took her hands in his touch gentle and reverent. "I don't just want you as my head of security, Clara. I want you as my partner. I want you in my life. I want to be a part of yours and Leo's. I want to build a new life with you, a life not based on money or power, but on honesty and trust. And I know, after everything we've been through, that you are the only woman I could ever love." What in the hell? Clara's heart, which had been so guarded for so long, finally surrendered. The cold, impenetrable shell she had built around herself began to crack, and a wave of emotion she had long denied herself washed over her. She saw in Alexander not the cold-hearted CEO, but a man who had been transformed by a love he never knew he needed. She saw in him a man who had seen her at her best and her worst, and had still chosen her. In the mouth of the alley stood Alexander Sterling. He was holding his phone, his face a perfect mask of shock, his stormy gray eyes wide with a profound, almost comical disbelief. He had been on his way to his car, having worked late, and had just witnessed his meek, timid, and utterly unremarkable employee defeat 3 armed thugs in a single, flawless, terrifying strike. The alley was a tableau of stunned silence, punctuated only by the low groans of the defeated thugs. Clara stood panting, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins, her fists clenched tight. She was a different woman than the timid office worker who had entered the alley just minutes before. Her shoulders were back, her gaze was sharp, and the fear in her eyes had been replaced by a hardened, familiar resolve. I never thought I would feel this way again," she whispered, a tear of pure, unadulterated hope rolling down her cheek. "I never thought I could trust anyone. But I trust you, Alexander. And I think I love you too." Alexander stood at the mouth of the alley, his phone still in his hand, his mouth slightly agape. He had witnessed a spectacle that defied his logical, data-driven mind. The woman he was about to fire, the woman he had dismissed as a liability, had just single-handedly dismantled 3 men twice her size, with a grace and ferocity that was breathtaking. The sight of her, a petite woman standing victorious over a pile of groaning men, was an image that would be seared into his memory forever. In that moment, the silent, emotional pact was sealed. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but a new beginning, a promise to build a life together, a life that would be a testament to their shared strength, their unwavering courage, and a love that had grown from the most unexpected of places, a corporate office, a dark alley, and a shared battle against a common enemy. He walked toward her slowly, cautiously, as if approaching a wild animal. "Clara," he said, his voice a low, disbelieving whisper. What in the hell was that? They had both been lost, two people from two different worlds, but they had found each other. And in the heart of the city that had once been so cold and unforgiving, a new dawn had just begun. Clara flinched at the sound of her name, the old mask of meekness slipping back into place. The adrenaline began to recede, and with it came the terrifying realization that she had just exposed herself. She was no longer a ghost. She was a woman with a secret, and the most powerful man in the city had just seen it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay with us for the next one. And while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, her voice thin and unconvincing. She began to walk away, a desperate attempt to flee the scene and the man who had just seen her secret. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Alexander, however, was faster. He stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Don't lie to me, he said, his voice now firm and full of a new, dangerous curiosity. That was not an accident. Those moves. That was the work of a professional. Who are you? Clara,